This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 100 of Here's How for the 24th of March 2020. When and if we all get back to normal, I'm sure insurance costs will be back on the agenda. Let's talk to someone who's leading the business campaign on the issue.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Coming up in a few minutes.
They suddenly spiraled from about 500 to 1,000 euro to 5, 10, 20, 30 and 50,000 euro very quickly.
So that's hold on, that's 100-fold increase. Do you have genuine examples of people being asked for 100 times more in premiums for the same thing over a few years?
Certainly have 50 and 60 times increases.
That's coming up shortly. But first, I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon, especially Deegan from Australia, who signed up as a patron since the last podcast. I really appreciate everyone who does that. If you don't know, Patreon is a system that allows people to donate $1 or $2 per podcast, and that helps me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. If you think you can do the same as Deegan and the other donors, there's details on the website and at the end of the show. There's a lot of people talking about the other thing, but I'm sure you've heard enough of it by now, and there's nothing extra that I can say that hasn't already been said, so let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the state of the world and its people. Bear in mind that life expectancy in Ireland in 1916 was just 53. Thinking of all the countries in the world, taking into account the huge populations of poor countries in Africa and Asia, what would you guess is the average life expectancy of people today? 50 years? 60? No, the average across the whole world is now 70. And again, across the whole world, what percent of the population do you think has access to electricity? The answer is 80%. And if you had to guess what percent of children had at least some of their vaccinations? Again, across the planet, the answer is 80%. And finally, if you had to guess over the last 100 years, taking into account the massive population explosion we've had, what has happened to the number of people, the absolute number, not the proportion, the number of people who die each year in natural disasters? Has it more than doubled? Stayed the same? In fact, the number has more than halved. All these figures come from a book by the Swedish academic Hans Rosling, and he formulated them to show us that sometimes things are much better than we think they are, and in particular, for all our cynicism, things can and do get better. Lots better. By those metrics that he chooses, the average person in the world today is vastly better off than the average person was in Ireland 100 years ago. More children, much more children are getting educated. Much more people are getting basic health care. Much more people have access to the basics of comfort that the whole of humanity went without for almost all of our existence. Sometimes we can be terribly stupid, but on the whole, humans are clever and creative. We can solve problems. We can make our lives better. That makes it all the more tragic when we don't, but on the whole, we're doing better, lots better than we were, and often way better than we actually think we're doing. Sometimes we create terrible problems, but we can solve problems too, and we do solve them. And maybe with that whole loss aversion thing in our mentality, we remember our failures better than our successes. That music you can hear in the background is the Italian resistance anthem Bella Ciao. It's being played by the National Theatre Orchestra of Serbia. But this is a recital with a difference. They're playing together, but they're not together. The recital was recorded over a live video call with a conductor and dozens of musicians, each playing from their own home. This technology would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. Now we take it for granted that it's in billions of people's pockets. Wash your hands.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line, I have Peter Boland. Peter is the owner of a wine merchant in Galway called Cases.ie, but that's not why I'm talking to him. He's also the director of the Alliance for Insurance Reform in Ireland. Peter, what is the Alliance for Insurance Reform and why do you exist?
Okay, well, the Alliance is essentially an alliance of 36 representative bodies who came together out of frustration because insurance has been a significant issue for the members over the last 5 years. And the sense at the end of 2017 was that the pace of reform was not nearly quick enough. So we established the Alliance collectively. We started with about 16 members covering areas such as the motor industry, hospitality, retail, and charities and voluntary groups. And since then, we have extended it to now 36 bodies.
Okay. And give me a sense of why you exist, in the sense of either you as a business or some businesses that you know of. What difficulties are they facing?
Okay, well, in a nutshell, I could probably use our Play Centre members as an example of what's going on. So about 5 years ago, they were paying approximately 500 to 1,000 euro a year for public and employer liability. So essentially to cover them for claims of negligence from the general public and from their own employees. And that had been the status quo, not just among play centres, but the entire leisure industry for years prior to that. Now, we had some warning from motor insurance. So motor insurance started to spiral around 2014. And then very quickly, it was followed in 15, 16 and 17 by liability insurance. So over that period, play centres, which are the centres often based on the outskirts of towns with a ball pool, a climbing frame and other ways of entertaining 4 to 10 year olds, particularly for birthday parties. They suddenly spiraled from about 500 to 1,000 euro to 5, 10, 20, 30 and 50,000 euro very quickly.
So that's hold on, that's 100-fold increase. Do you have genuine examples of people being asked for 100 times more in premiums for the same thing over a few years?
Certainly have 50 and 60 times increases for play centre members, and not just play centres, but adventure centres, bouncy castle operators, and anybody else in what was suddenly deemed high risk areas. So these were areas that had motored along very nicely for years. And in fact, the claim rate in play centres is very low.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because was this triggered by some series of claims, or some one very big claim that the people being asked for this money had, or that maybe similar businesses had?
No, this is one of the biggest mysteries of all. There was statistically, certainly there was no event that triggered these enormous increases. So whilst the level of claims and the size of the awards have always been enormous in Ireland, we did not see an enormous increase over the last 5 years, and yet something happened, and we don't know what it is, which suddenly led to these penal increases in insurance premiums. And so as you can imagine, play centres are SMEs, classic SMEs. They're run by typically an individual or a couple. They're very small. They provide a family with an income, and obviously they provide an income to their employees as well, either full-time or part-time. But there are few, if any, play centre owners driving around in Porsches.
Oh, okay. Pause with that for a second, because I think it's important to get to the bottom of that. And that's probably a good example. I suspect that you're picking a particularly stark example, but I know that happens, maybe not quite that extreme, in other industries. But do you have evidence that the insurance industry is now making supernormal profits?
Yeah, well, two things on that. First of all, there is virtually no data available on liability insurance. And this is probably one of the biggest scandals of the current crisis, is that the state either legally or morally obliges us to purchase insurance, and then leaves us in the dark with the insurance industry and the legal industry. So there is a certain amount of data available on motor, and that's certainly starting to improve now with the publication by the central bank of data in December. But
but that's claims data and payouts data, and I can understand that perhaps should be available. It's generally not available. But the profits of insurance companies, is it possible to see, have their profits gone through the roof?
There's some data. It's partial at best. Certainly the insurers who publish their data in Ireland, their profitability has increased dramatically.
For example?
3 to 4 years. So, for example, FBD doubled their profits in the current year compared to the figures that they reported last year.
Okay, pause. I want to pause you on that, Peter, because that's quite important. And one thing that I know about the insurance industry is that it's quite cyclical, and it has maybe a 10 to 12 year cycle. And what happens with insurance companies, because of competition and claims experience and a few other factors, they tend to make losses for several years in a cycle. They then pull into breaking even, and then they make quite large profits, and then the cycle happens again. So it's fairly easy to find a shortish few years where you can say an insurance company's profit has gone from nothing and had an apparently very large percentage increase. But is that something you can see over a decadal time span, or is that just a normal cycle?
William, that's at the heart of our absolute frustration when it comes to transparency in this sector. Because it is so cyclical, it is possible for either side of the argument to pick a year or 2 years and justify their beliefs, mostly because typically these are ideology-based or financially based claims. Essentially,
motivated thinking, I think, is what the psychologists call it politely.
Well, there you go. And or often self-preservation as well, because there's so much money to be made out of this sector. But
so essentially the problem is, Peter, that if you want to, you can select a couple of years and say, oh, look, the insurance company's profits have gone up tenfold. They could choose a different time span and say that, oh, in fact, our profits have gone way down. Is there anything independent of that you can point to that says maybe over a very long period either they're making supernormal profits or they're making way more profits than similar businesses in other countries, for example?
No, there was a terrific book called The Blue Book, which was published by the central bank every year and summarised the data across the entire industry in Ireland. It was abolished by the central bank at the end of 2015, and we've had nothing since. So in the teeth of the biggest insurance cost crisis that businesses and voluntary groups have experienced in this country, we have no data. We do know, because we asked our members, that they've suffered increases of an average of 204% over the last 5 years. And we
Pause with that, because we have intelligent listeners on this podcast, and we like to make sure that not only do we get the right statistics, it's also important to make sure that they're in context. You say that your members have had a 204 on average percent. That's basically a trebling of their insurance costs. It's probably likely that people who've had their insurance go way up are the sort of people who will join your insurance reform group, and people whose premiums have been flat or going down aren't so motivated to do so. So that, I'm sure what you're saying is correct, but you can agree that it might not be relevant.
Well, we've always conceded that the figures are self-selecting for that exact reason. But that doesn't in any way soften the impact of those increases for the businesses involved. And if you look at our membership, it goes right across the range, covers all of hospitality, all of retail, transport, nursing homes, travel.
So you say all of retail, and I can see on your website here RG Data, which would be the small shops group, representative group. Yeah. So when you give us that 204% increase, a trebling of the price, is that RG Data getting every one of their members to let them know and then them passing that information on to you, or is that just a self-selecting group?
It was the respondents came from RG Data, from the CSNA, which is the convenience stores.
Sure, but is it everybody, for example, in RG Data, or is it just a self-selecting group within RG Data?
No, it's anyone who chose to respond.
Okay.
500 respondents.
Okay. I accept, of course, that, you're trying to get figures that are very difficult to get, but you conceded that given that it's self-selecting, those figures are problematic. Nevertheless, anecdotally, there does seem to be a big problem.
No, they're not problematic in the sense that they reflect the experience of the members who responded, and they're significant enough to suggest that there is a serious problem.
Okay.
And we have seen the implications of that problem in closures already prior to the coronavirus outbreak changing everything. And possibly forever. We were looking at a couple of thousand job losses already. And the sectors that have started to fold first are the ones that have been weakened by insurance already. And one of the major issues from our point of view now is that once COVID-19 works its way through the system, Ireland and abroad, the recovery of the economy is going to be dependent on barriers being taken out of the way. And one of those, we know from our experience over the last 2 years, is insurance. And it just makes reform in this area all the more urgent now.
Oh, okay. One of the things, and I think probably as well as everybody else, that there are some privileged groups in our society. There are some groups who are perhaps on the pig's back at the expense of other people. And when it comes to finding data, they get all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't look into their particular nice little earners. And you can pretty much determine who knows that they're squeezing the market too hard by the people who say, oh, we shouldn't bother looking at this. So my question for you then, will you be happy for perhaps a state-run database to keep a very accurate record of insurance prices, the trends in those prices, and the claims and the trends in claims?
It's absolutely essential, and we've been calling for it for day one, because really and truly, William, you cannot legislate for or monitor a sector unless you have data. And on liability insurance, there is no data. And what's all the more concerning is that in our recent meetings with the central bank, it's becoming clearer and clearer to us that we won't have data this year on liability, and we would have concerns about whether we'll have any in 2021. So this is an unsupervised Klondike at the moment, for anyone who's making money out of the insurance industry.
And these insurance companies all have to be licensed by the central bank. It would be a relatively easy task for the central bank to say, okay, one of the conditions of your license is to supply all of this data anonymized to then be published.
To a certain extent, we feel that the central bank is hopelessly compromised in the sense that they have...
Perhaps not the central bank, but for somebody, for them to supply it to someone so that metrics can be applied to it and we can, see who is making big money, if anyone.
Well, we've always thought that the responsibility for the data would be given to somebody with a more consumer-oriented focus, like, for example, the Personal Injuries Assessment Board. Mm-hmm. But the legislation specifies that the data, when it is compiled, will be compiled by the central bank. However, the National Claims Information Database, which, as I mentioned already, has now published motor insurance data, has not even published a proposal yet on liability insurance.
Okay, pause on that, because I wanted to move on to motor insurance. And the cry, I think, went up first amongst people getting motor insurance. And there has been an active campaign on that for many years. It's been covered on this podcast before. At some stages, there were even the types of rural TDs who may or may not end up propping up the next government, making demands for things like a state-run motor insurance company that would sell cheap insurance to young drivers. But the bottom line is that Ireland has often a terrible record for deaths and injuries on the road, and that is reflected in the insurance premiums that people pay, and that's right and proper, isn't it? We shouldn't have dangerous drivers impose the cost of their recklessness on the whole of society.
Well, I'd have to pull you up on that one. We're now the second safest country in Europe when it comes to road safety. Incidentally, we're the fourth safest when it comes to employee safety. So we are one of the safest countries in Europe at this stage, and that is not in any way reflected in our insurance costs.
Well, I've actually been studying some figures for this, and that may well be true. But there's enormous variation throughout the country, and I have, under great duress, extracted some figures from the RSA, the Road Safety Authority, and there are some counties in Ireland that have a 6 or 7 times worse death rate than others. That indicates that there are some very careless people out there, doesn't it?
Well, it does, or maybe just that very busy roads drive through their counties. I could nearly guess the ones that would have the higher rates.
No, well, maybe you can guess it, but it's not associated with busy roads through their counties. If you're going to get killed on the roads in Ireland, you're going to be in a BMW, and I don't mean a Bavarische Motorwerk. I mean in the Borders, Midlands and West. And there is a culture of disregard for rules of the road in many of those places, and that's showing up in the death rates.
Okay, but I think by European standards, we're a very safe country at this stage. And so we would have an expectation that the kind of motor insurance premiums that we pay would reflect that. And unfortunately, they don't.
As well as safe, the other thing that goes into that is the level of the awards. What's your view on that?
Yeah, you've now got to the heart of it. When awards constitute about 40% of the total cost of an insurance premium, mm-hmm. Which they now do, it is clear that they must be part of the problem and part of the solution. And the reality is that for minor injuries, we pay in this country 4.4 times more than is paid in the UK. Mm-hmm. And the UK is regarded as an outlier for the rest of Europe, to such an extent that the UK is now actively involved in driving damages for minor injuries down even further. So we will be even more of an outlier. So I'll give you one example. Mm-hmm. And this applies to the broader insurance area. So I'm in a local hostelry, which unfortunately I won't be for a while now, but in a local hostelry, and I trip over, regardless of whose responsibility that is. Mm-hmm. And that's another issue. I hurt my thumb. I don't break it. There's no ligament damage. I just bruise it. So there's a bit of swelling. I take a couple of paracetamol. It's a bit sore tomorrow, and it's fine by the weekend. If I choose to sue that pub, I'm in the frame for €21,200, and that's only if I go to PIAB. Now, that's a bruise.
This is the Personal Injuries Assessment Board avoiding the courts.
Absolutely. So first step on the ladder, 21,200. There is no planet where that makes sense. It's less than 20% of that in the UK. Mm-hmm. And for most other European countries, it's zero or close to zero because it's regarded as a minor injury. So the fact that we have got to a stage now where we are paying the price of a family car or an extension to the house for a bruised thumb that takes a weekend and a couple of paracetamol to solve is senseless. And that has been driving to a greater or lesser extent the level of insurance premiums in this country.
I'm not sure what the builders cost in your neck of the woods, but I accept that, and I think that's widely held. But my question then would be, and I will tell you what a fairly senior person in the insurance industry said to me, and that was that the dead are cheap. That the payout for somebody who's killed, for example, in a car crash is relatively low. It's in the low hundreds of thousands, even in the worst case scenarios. The really serious payouts are going to people who are seriously injured in car crashes, in the multi-million euro payouts. Those are the ones, are they not, that are really driving up the cost of claims, these many millions, where in fairness, someone who has a disability for life, somebody who needs care perhaps for life and might be quite young, those payments may be very large, but it's difficult to argue that they're unfair.
No, and we have never had an issue with the level of damages being paid for serious injuries. The problem is with the 80% of claims that are made for minor soft tissue injuries.
Okay, and I don't have the figure, and maybe you do, but you say 80% of claims, but what percent of payouts does that represent?
It's not anywhere near 80%.
Because this is a long tail. It's an 80-20 rule or something like that. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the 80% of money, not the 80% of incidents, the 80% of money is likely going to people where it would be very difficult to say those claims should be reduced.
Now, I've two things on that. First of all, I don't have the figure to hand, but it's nowhere near 80%. But secondly, you're absolutely right. You could not possibly dispute the level of damages that are being given for serious injuries. And that is not where the issue is. The issue is that the curve in Ireland brings you up to the top level of damages far more quickly than in other countries. Typically, other nations will have a bell curve, mm-hmm. Where it works its way slowly up towards a peak for more serious injuries. Mm-hmm. We get to that top level far more quickly in Ireland. Mm-hmm. That's what gets us into very expensive motor and liability insurance.
Mm-hmm. I think that's called a logarithmic curve, but I just want to move on to one last issue. You are called the Alliance for Insurance Reform, but as it appears to me on the website, you seem to be associated with a PR company called Drury Porter Novelli. That's a pretty high-powered PR company. Are we looking at a real grassroots campaign when we look at your organisation, or is this one set of industries lobbying to get one over on another set of industries, the insurance industry?
Okay, well, if you look, two things. First of all, have a look at our full membership. So it includes the Wheel, mm-hmm. which represents charities, voluntary and community groups. It would include IFA, mm-hmm. which is the Association of Irish Festival Events, the Federation of Irish Sport, which represents sports organisations in Ireland, quite a number of PPNs, the public participation networks, who represent community groups in the local authority areas in Ireland. Mm-hmm. So we have a very broad constituency. And it applies, to be honest with you, most particularly to community and voluntary groups at the moment because of the kind of impact that they're feeling on this. You have to have a reputable public relations agency or public affairs agency working in your team. Now, is because you are campaigning in an area with two of the best funded and most professional lobby groups in the country, Insurance Ireland and the Law Society. There's no point in going into battle with sticks when everybody else is carrying machine guns.
Peter Boland, Director of the Alliance for Insurance Reform, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, William.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow the Alliance for Insurance Reform at InsuranceRefIRE. And get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Thanks again to Deegan and all the other patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. And if you could do the same as them and donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, go to patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website, and there you can also find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All the information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.